The Soybean School on realagriculture.com is brought to you by Pride Seeds, Cruiser Max Vibrance, High Stick NT, and the Manitoba Pulse Growers.
I'm Lindsay Smith with realagriculture.com. I'm joined today by Terry Buss, Farm Production Advisor, Crops with Mafford.
Yep,
good?
That's good.
All right, you guys keep changing your names. Let's talk soybean row spacing and plant populations. Is there an ideal row spacing for soybeans in Manitoba?
I would say that there actually isn't an ideal row spacing in Manitoba based on the work we've done here so far. I think that there is an ideal row spacing for each producer depending on what it is that they have for equipment, and really the economics around what they're working with on their particular farm. Now, this is different as you move down into the U.S. In the U.S., they would suggest that an ideal row spacing in some of the states, they talk about 15-inch being an ideal row spacing. They see that as the best balance between lower seeding rates and keeping canopies cool because they're getting good canopy closure, and that means that they've got cooler temperatures in that canopy during pollination, and they're keeping the heat away during that process, which can be quite fragile when you get into really hot climates. In other parts of the states, the research is tending to suggest that the narrower the row spacing, the better. So they're saying solid seeded might have an advantage over any type of planter row spacing simply because of that same issue of maintaining appropriate temperatures for pollination. I think that's the best way to say it, because sometimes it's about keeping things warm, sometimes it's about keeping things cool. Up here in Manitoba, given our more northern location and the climate that we're in, we're not really sure that that type of temperature factor is the biggest issue. Instead, what we're looking at is what's the row spacing that works for you. The reason that I have clients interested in wider row spacings are primarily centered around saving on seed, right? Seed's expensive, $100 per acre, maybe more. If you can go to a wider row spacing and cut that by 10 or 15%, that could be a significant savings, especially when you're putting in thousands of acres of beans. So that's one of the reasons people might go to that type of a system, is to reduce their seed cost. I think that for us, based on the research so far, that is the primary advantage to a wider row spacing. You have more precise planting with a vacuum plate planter, you're reducing your seeding rates because you don't want to crowd the plants within that row, and so you're saving something on seed. And with the cost of seed, that can be significant. However, you also have to balance that off over the fact that you may have to buy more equipment. The planter you may have, if you have one, may be quite small. It may not have a central loading system, so you have to fill all the planter boxes every time. That can take you a long time to seed beans. You may be a lot faster with something like an air drill. And in our kind of climate, with the rain we're getting, with the saturated soils out in the area that I serve, time is everything. You've got to be timely, right? So then you have to play that off over buying one of the larger one of the larger vacuum plate planters. There's a significant cost associated with that. So is the savings on seed going to cover the cost of the planter? There's also things like time management on the farm that come into that. If you're able to run a large planter, which now run at speeds that can approach, proper air drill speeds, 4 or 5 mile an hour. I've got clients doing a good job at that speed. Maybe you can run a large planter and your air drill at the same time. You cover more ground. That may be true if you have the people, if you have the money, if it makes financial sense for you. The only clients I have who are really looking at that scale of economics are putting in quite a few thousands of acres of beans. And usually they're growing another row crop besides, like corn or sunflower. And so it makes more sense to them.
You also made, there's a keyword there that you said, doing a good job.
Yes.
So what's the hiccup then? I mean, it's always, I suppose, attractive to maybe want to go a little faster or get a fancier piece of equipment. But what's the importance of assessing the stand that you're already achieving with the equipment you have?
Well, it's your starting point. I mean, it's where we get started in figuring out whether we're doing a good job and whether some of these other options are going to make sense for us. I have a number of people who come in the office and they want to talk about reducing seeding rate. With seed and seeding in soybeans, the big topic is always reducing seeding rate to reduce costs. But they don't always have a good sense of how good of a job they're doing now. So what does your plant stand look like? Have you assessed it? Have you done counts? One of my favorite tools, the one I carry it around with me almost habitually all spring long, is the hula hoop. This hula hoop is a special one. I've adjusted it so it has a diameter of 28¼ inches. Once it has that diameter, every count you take with this hula hoop, you multiply by 10,000. So for me, it's an easy way of doing plant stand counts. For anyone who's doing 15-inch rows or less with an air drill, not a planter, but an air drill, the hula hoop method is a really good way to go. I would mention as well that Manitoba Pulse Growers Association has the Manitoba Bean app, which is an online app on their website, where you can use any size hula hoop and you can enter all of your data there. It does all the math for you. It's really, really easy to do this now. We really don't have an excuse for not doing these type of counts. So first step, when you're considering the whole seeding thing, is to go out and actually assess the stand that you're getting. What's your mortality like? You know what your germination rate is. You're going to knock a little bit off for emergence, but when you start doing this with the hula hoop, you get a really good sense of whether something you're doing with your seeding equipment is actually causing the problem, right? And then once you start there, you can assess whether or not a different piece of seeding equipment or a change in your practices could actually increase the survival of your soybean seedlings.
And is there, so then to take it the next step, is there an ideal number, and does it change with seeding type, so row spacing type?
That's a question we've been working on for an awfully long time now, and a lot of jurisdictions around North America have done a lot of research on this. We finally now have, thanks to the efforts of Ag Canada, the Manitoba Pulse Growers, and my own department, we now have data that's been generated on the seeding rate question across row spacings in Manitoba. We've got 20 years of data. That data would suggest that in terms of a physical optimum, it's actually working out to be about 160,000 live plants per acre. And notice the terminology, live plants per acre. We really want the industry to go to talk about live plants per acre. Not seeds per acre, not pounds per acre, not bushels per acre. All of those things are dealt with at one point or another in the mathematics that we do, but we want to have the conversation about live plants per acre. So 160,000 live is the physical optimum. The economic optimum is going to be a little bit less than that, because those last pounds of seed don't necessarily pay for themselves, even though they do statistically increase yield. So the actual economic optimum for a grower will vary from seed lot to seed lot and from machine to machine and from operator to operator, but for most people it's probably somewhere between 150 and 140,000 live plants per acre. Somewhere in there is where the economic optimum lies. And it's turned out from the research that that's true across row spacings. We used to start changing seeding rates in terms of live plants per acre depending on row spacing. It turns out that live plants per acre holds the same. Now your actual seeds per acre, or pounds per acre, bushels per acre will be different because the different machines will give you different mortalities and all that sort of stuff. But the final target live plants per acre turns out to be the same both for wide and narrow rows.
Perfect. Okay, so that's at least a pretty solid starting point to work backwards from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can do your counts. You can assess whether you're getting to that area. When you're doing your counts with your hula hoop, when you've got this on the ground, doesn't it frame the plants nicely? So if you're, especially with an air drill, with a planter as well to an extent, although with planters we don't use hula hoops, but with an air drill, when you put this down, it gives you a nice picture so you can say, how even is my seeding job? Is it clumpy? Am I spilling it all over the place? Or is it actually looking pretty uniform? So it gives you all that data. You can do seedling disease assessments while you're doing this. And one thing I'll mention, the plants that we have in the background here are quite large. It's hard to do stand counts in here now. We've missed our opportunity in the spring. We wanted to do it earlier on when we felt that emergence had finally been completed. But remember, there's always a chance to do stand counts in the fall after harvest. I've had a number of clients go in after they've combined. You've got all the little stem stumps sitting there, and you can still gather some of that data. So I really encourage people to do that.
And you'll also see how many lower pods you missed.
Well, yeah, you can do an assessment of that. So you've got a harvest assessment, see how well you're running your harvest equipment, and you've got a stand assessment opportunity before the snow comes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Terry.
Oh, no problem at all.